If you have your Bibles, turn to the book of Exodus. We're going to look at Exodus chapter 2. We're going to attempt to cover the whole chapter, which is about 25 verses. And I will be very honest, I don't know the last time I preached 25 verses. It's usually just a handful. But we're going to read verses 1 through 25, and then we will get started. Moses tells us this. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and dabbed it in with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While her young women walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds, and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. And when the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the river." One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together, and he said to the man in the wrong, "Why do you strike your companion?" He answered, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely this thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father, Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and they even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. One of the overarching themes of the book of Exodus is simply this: promise kept. When you look at all the promises that God made to Abraham, he made them to Isaac, and he made them to Jacob in the book of Genesis, you ultimately see their fulfillment in the book of Exodus. And we start here with the birth of Moses. And the way tonight I hope it kind of flows is we're going to look at one big overarching theme we see in this chapter, and then just some sub-themes, if you will, beyond that. But I want you to notice there are some very much close similarities to the birth of Moses and the birth of Christ. For one, the children of Israel are under foreign rule, except in here it's the Egyptians. When Christ is born, it's the Romans. Whenever Moses is born, they're killing the children. Throw the baby boys in the Nile. Well, what happens whenever Jesus is born? Herod sends out his troops to kill the children by the masses. We also have to notice the similarity of the fact Moses was called to perform an exodus. Moses' call to perform his exodus was to take a group of roughly 4 to 5 million people and deliver them out of Egyptian slavery and bondage. Jesus is called to perform a greater exodus. He is called to deliver souls from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of heaven. That is a far greater exodus. That is a far greater leaving than coming out of some bondage. Jesus, which is the whole point of Hebrews when we talk about Jesus, he was a greater Moses. He performed a far greater exodus in delivering us from death to life than there could ever been of coming out of some slavery and hard times into a land where they still had to fight. But what we see here in these first 10 verses is something you cannot get away from, and that is the providence of God. God is moving, and he's orchestrating things according to his perfect will. Just because things look amiss right now and politically, and we look at culture and things of that nature, this is going to be an election year. I promise you, whoever is voted in as our next president, no matter the whatever political affiliation he has, God didn't fall off the throne no matter who it was. He is still ruling and reigning from heaven, and everything is going perfectly to plan. That is the exact same thing that's happening here in Exodus. Because look what happens. This plan to get Moses to where he's at, nobody would be wise enough to orchestrate this type of plan. What type of plan involves using enemies to fund the training of the one that's going to be the liberator and ultimately, through the hand of God, the demise of a nation? Only God can work a plan and orchestrate it like that. And it starts off with just saying who it is that come together. It is both of Moses' parents are from the house and the tribe of Levi, which is the very tribe that will end up serving in all the religious, spiritual matters of the nation from here on out as far as the nation of Israel is concerned. But notice what it says about Moses. It says that he was a fine child. The King James says he was goodly to look at. This doesn't necessarily mean, there ain't no parent that's ever not had a child that says, my baby is the cutest baby that's walked on the face of the planet. Cutest baby ever born. All 4 of mine, they were the cutest babies that were ever born when they were children. This word goodly is reminiscent of back to creation. When at the end of every day, God said that that day and everything that was made, it was good. Then you get on down to where Moses is put in the ark, the smaller ark that his mother made from him, which is reminiscent, obviously, of an innocent child compared to 8 people that are in essence at the mercy of the storm, which we knew God preserved and would preserve Noah and his family. When they come off the ark, it was almost like a new creation. Everything that's being said here in Exodus chapter 2 is telling us there's something new coming. And that new thing is the birth of the leader that is going to take the people out of bondage and deliver them into freedom. They're on the dawn of a new age. And then it goes on and it tells us, and then the fact that however long Moses' mama was putting Moses in said basket, and the reason he was placed in the reeds is so Moses don't get washed down the river. They would put him in these reeds, and when I was reading, some of these reeds would grow up to 10 feet tall. And she could place him strategically in amongst those reeds to where the current wouldn't get him. His sister Miriam could go down and hang out, keep an eye on Moses. And then all of a sudden this day comes when Pharaoh's daughter comes to the Nile. It's very interesting when you read about Pharaoh's daughter. She was some priestess of one of the plethora of gods that they worshiped. And just so happens that her going to the river wasn't just her to take a bath. It was a religious practice. One commentator almost believed it was to the point that Moses' mama knew that she came and purposefully put him there so he could possibly be found. And so Pharaoh's daughter would go to the Egyptian people. The Nile was life. They worshiped the Nile as a god that gave life. So what's so amazing is in God's plan, when to the Hebrew people, the Nile for the moment represented death, life is getting ready to come out of the Nile that is going to be the one that grants them their freedom. Only God can work things this way. Only He can do it this way. And then it gets down to the point to where we know this story well enough, I almost wouldn't even need to read my Bible and just could recount it. We all know how this plays out. To the point, Moses' mom has spent at least 3 months trying to keep him quiet, keep him hid away. And so that was the point of putting him in the river. Pharaoh's daughter finds him. And then Miriam, his sister, has enough whereabouts to say, you want me to go find one of these Hebrew moms to be this baby's wet nurse? And she's like, that's a great idea. You go do that. And then goes finds Moses' mother. You nurse him till he's 4 or 5 years old, because that's about how long they would take before they would wean a child, an infant then. And I will pay you. But here's what happens the moment that happens. Moses' mama ain't got to hide him no more. She gets to enjoy having her son without the fear of Egyptian soldiers showing up to kill her baby boy. Only God works things that way. And so what do you think Moses' mom's been teaching him about the God of their people? To the point that finally, once he gets old enough, he goes in and he becomes Pharaoh's grandson. He is trained. You see, you need to understand, Egypt of this time is the lone superpower of the world. He's about to get the finest secular education out of anyone. He's going to be trained, in essence, their theology. He's going to be trained in battle. All the things he's going to need to know how to do whenever he is leading a group, as God puts him, a group of stiff-necked people. God orchestrated that. But we need to understand that this orchestration that's happened with the birth of this child was because of a promise to a nomad 430 years prior. God don't forget nothing. Whenever you get down here to the end of this chapter and it says God remembered the promise, it wasn't because he forgot. God does not forget anything. Nothing slips through his hands. But he told Abraham in Genesis 15, your people are going to sojourn in a land, and they're going to be there roughly 400 years. We think, oh my goodness, that's multiple generations that the nation of Israel has. Well, we don't know how long after Joseph died that things flipped in Egypt. But just because there's turmoil in your life and hardship, it does not mean God's not working. It could actually mean the polar opposite, that he is greatly at work. He is greatly at work in chapter 2 Because now all of a sudden they've been praying, they've been crying out. He's here. Your liberator's drawing breath. Now, what's another thing that's interesting about the similitudes between Christ and Moses is this chapter covers almost 80 years of Moses' life. Because you've got the first 40 when he's in Egypt, then the last 40 whenever he's hanging out in Midian. This chapter covers, but it skips his childhood. Not much different than the Gospels do in skipping the childhood of Christ. We have one account of Jesus when he's 12 years old, and after that, adult. Same thing here with Moses. So it goes on and it starts to tell us in verse 11, what we see in the first 10 chapters is what happens when God orchestrates, God does things according to his will and his power. And just so you know, and I'm sure you do know, no plan of no Pharaoh, no plan of no king, no plan of no president, political leaders thwarts the plan of a sovereign providential God. They can plan to do this, they can plan to do that, and at the end of the day, it's all going to fall as nothing compared to the will of God. It even tells us that the king's heart, God moves it like a river through his hands. There's nothing that thwarts the plan of God in this world. But what we see happening in verse 11 is what happens when we try to take things in our own hands. Okay? Because it says, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people. That phrase is very significant because what it's implying is what it references over in Hebrews chapter 11, where it says Moses chose not to take the pleasures of Egypt and all that and chose to be associated with the people of God. It don't tell us explicitly here, but there was a moment in Moses' life when it was the teaching of his mother coming to remembrance, not real sure, he chose to disassociate with the Egyptian life. I will go on to say this. Through whatever happened, Moses had a whereabout. There's something about leadership. One of the many things that I do at Chick-fil-A, one of the things that I'm kind of responsible for is leadership and development of our staff. When it comes to leading, it's just this burning, it's hard to put into words what it is in a person's life when you know what God's called you to do. And nothing but doing that very thing brings you satisfaction. According to Acts chapter 7, when Stephen is giving his great debate and he's speaking of Moses and what this account here of when he kills this Egyptian, Moses took it into his own hands already knowing he was going to be Israel's redeemer. He was going to be the one to save them. And when he does what he did right here, he didn't understand why the other Hebrews didn't just fall right in line and say, all right, this is it, we're coming out. We'll see here in a minute, they actually accuse him of the opposite. So it says that one day when he had grown up, he went out to his people and he looked on their burden and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. So he's already disassociated with the Egyptians. Those are not my people. I am a Hebrew. The people that are in slavery and bondage, those are my people, and those are who I'm going to align with. But look what he says here. In verse 12, it says, he looked this way and that, which indicates that he knew what he was about to do wasn't necessarily right. If you've done something right in your life, have you ever looked one way or the other to see if anybody saw you do it? Most people would be like, no. Unless the Lord's telling you to do something and don't let nobody find out. If you do something right in your life, you do a good job at work, you're doing what you're supposed to, it don't really matter who sees you do it, does it? But Moses is looking around because he done knows what he's going to do in his heart, which is in essence him trying to take on the role of leader and deliverer before God's timing. He's like, I will deliver these people, but it's going to come through my hands, not God's. That is a dangerous place for leaders and leadership to get. If we at this church ever say, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, and we exclude God out of the equation, what we will do is we will kill folks. I don't mean physically, I mean spiritually. We will place burdens on folks just like the Pharisees did. It is dangerous when leaders begin to operate and try to do things outside of the will of God. This is what Moses tried to do here, and he ended up killing a man that may not necessarily had to die if he'd have just waited on God. But now I will tell you this much about leaders and leadership. Moses' desire was in the right place. His heart's in the right place. He wants to see his people free. But the route of getting there was wrong. There's sometimes as a leader, and I can tell you as me being a leader, my heart has been in the right place. But the course of action I took, even though my heart was in the right place, was wrong. We have to be careful of that. And so he goes on and he rises up, he kills this Egyptian, and then it tells us in verse 13, he goes out the next day. When he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together, and he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? He answered, who made you a prince and judge over us? So now he had already physically, in essence, disassociated himself with the people of Egypt. Whenever he killed this Egyptian, these Egyptian taskmasters worked under the bidding of Pharaoh and Pharaoh alone. And to impede what was in essence a building or construction edict, because it was their job to make sure the pyramids got built, so on and so forth. To impede that or prohibit that was messing in essence with Pharaoh himself. And the consequences of that was death. So whenever he killed this taskmaster and he don't report home or he don't report where he's supposed to at the end of the day, they would immediately have started an investigation to find the man. So Moses has already disassociated himself with Egypt, and then that was the final line in the sand, so to speak. But now he's trying to help his Hebrew brothers, and they're saying, who are you to be a judge and a prince over us? They don't even see him as one of their people. Moses is completely alone. Now, as a prince of Egypt, he would have had right to judge this situation. But apparently it's already knew what has happened. And so they're like, who are you to judge us? Are you going to kill me like you did the guy yesterday? Jackson likes to say it last morning ago. Yesterday's not in the vocabulary. Jackson will say last morning ago. There's something else about leadership that a lot of people don't realize. If you're going to lead and you're going to lead well, it can feel very lonely. If our pastor, your pastor, my pastor, and our pastors we have here was to be completely transparent, they would say, you're absolutely right. There's something about when God puts a calling on a man to lead in a dynamic way, he thinks differently. He operates differently. He functions differently. He has a different calling on his life. And sometimes because of that, it can feel like a very lonely journey. We need to take our pastors and our lead pastor and put that into consideration at times. Just a text message of thank you for what you do. Because it can at times feel like it's a lonely journey that's being walked absolutely alone. And they need that encouragement. So he's not accepted by the Egyptians no more. He's not accepted by the Hebrews. And now he's a fugitive. He's a man on the run. Because he's took matters into his own hands. There's sometimes exiles come because God needs to get us out and away from stuff. But sometimes the hardship and exiles come because we got ahead of God in something that He's going to do, but it's going to be in His timing, not ours. And we have to learn to be patient and faithful and wait on His timing and His moving. And so it goes on and it tells us this. It says, then Moses was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian. He sat by a well. Now it's interesting. Why Midian? Why did he go run into Midian? Because there's similitudes of the covenant of the people of God in Midian. And what I mean by that, when you get over into Judges, we learn and read that the Midians were enemies of the nation of Israel. But here, the Midianite people came from the union of Moses and the wife he took after Sarah had died. So there would have been some sort of knowledge of God, of the covenant. He's still trying to associate with the people of God, just not in Egypt. And so it goes on and it tells us that he sat by a well. And it says, now the priest of Midian, and that word priest can also mean chieftain. The chief of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. Now we see Moses behaving the same way. Moses had it in his heart to help and serve others. The greatest asset of a leader can be for him to have a servant's heart. If a leader comes into this church and behaves in a way that the church is here to serve him instead of vice versa, that is a proud man that will do nothing but destroy a church. A leader has to have a servant's heart. I even ask people when I interview them at the store, tell me, what does the word servanthood mean to you? And you know what most of the younger generation can tell me? I've never heard that word in my life. Now I'm like, it's okay, there's no right or wrong, just whatever's the first thing that pops in your head. This is a servant's heart. I come in, toilet's leaking, I have the ability to fix it, but I say, I ain't got time, I got to preach tonight. I got to do X, Y, Z. Let somebody else deal with that. If our leaders would be unwilling to do that, they're undeserving to stand here. You have to have a heart to serve people. If you're going to, you can be a leader, or in other words, I'll tell you, a manager. There's a vast difference in leading and managing. You can be a manager and say, yeah, let somebody else do that. Or you can be a leader and have the capacity to do it yourself and serve in a fashion or form. So here we see Moses again. It's in his heart to help and to serve. The first time he killed somebody, but this time he was able to help a group of people with no lives lost. It's like the Lord's already beginning to school Moses on like, yes, you have the right motives, but let's teach you how to come about with better actions. He's able to serve these people, no lives lost. These 7 girls get water and are able to take it back to their father. And so it says that when the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father, Reuel, he said, how is it that you have come home so soon today? They said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock. So not much has changed in Moses' attire. He still very much looks like an Egyptian. And so these girls' father is asking, where's he at? Why did you leave him at the well whenever he helped you do this? Go get him. And it is believed that as a leader of a tribe or a clan, whatever that looks like. Everybody knows who Egypt is and what they're about. It could be a good political move for this tribe to befriend an Egyptian and have an Egyptian ally. So go get him. And then it says, call him that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man. So now Moses, as we will learn, first 40 years, a life of prominence, prestige. Everyone's at his beckoning call to whatever he wanted. To now, the next 40 years are of obscurity. He's on the backside of a desert watching sheep. Probably one of the most educated men of the day is now watching sheep in the desert. And he's probably thinking all of it's a waste of time. Now, please don't ever think the moments of obscurity when you feel like nothing is happening, nothing is going on. Because what we learn throughout Scripture is God takes his choicest vessels and takes and hides them away until it's their time to shine. And then they have their moment when they bring. See, everything Moses did by his own means, if he would have liberated Egypt through his two hands, Moses gets the glory. The glory does not go to the creator of all things. It goes to one single man. But the way Moses ends up liberating, there's no question who gets the glory in that matter. God will take his choicest vessels, stuff them away, train them and teach them. Paul spent 3 years in the desert. Jesus constantly going and getting along with the Father. It's 30 years of his life, Scripture don't even really account for. We don't know what happened till he steps on the scene, and then things really start to change. Things really starts to change the next time Moses steps foot back in Egypt. God takes those, and just so you know who his choicest vessels are? If you're in Christ and you're sitting here tonight. And there are times that he takes us, thank goodness it's not for 40 years or 80 years in Moses' place before he really got to what God called him to do. Most of us don't have that lifespan. But he takes us and he sticks us away. He teaches us and he grooms us through adversity and trials and through his word and through preaching and reading, and he gets us ready for that moment. And then in that moment, there's no question who gets the glory in it all. If you want the glory for yourself, you have the wrong motives to begin with. My only hope is whenever I get done, every time I teach, it's not what a wonderful sermon, it's what a wonderful Savior. I preach to an audience of one. And what I mean by that, yes, this sanctuary is full, but I want heaven to be proud of what is said. And if heaven is honored and God is honored, then that's good enough. God takes us and he'll stick us away. And he gets us ready. And then he allows Moses to step back on the scene. And then what happens? A nation is liberated. God changes this man to the point in one place that we read not that long ago in Real Faith on a Friday night. It said Moses was the humblest man that walked the face of the earth. Went from a pride-filled, proud prince of Egypt to the humblest man that walked the face of the earth. What type of man do you think, and lady, do you think God can use? Is it one that's filled with pride and ego and self that tries to take things into his own hands or her own hands? Or is it someone who's low and humble, that don't want no esteem, no glory, no honor for themselves, but all wants all honor and glory reflected back to Christ. What type of heart do you think God uses? It's the humble one. Now, I know that this was a quick rendition of Exodus chapter 2, but Pastor, I'm done.